Welcome to The Firm. On the show this week, why the Modi government's application of environment law is painting a not-so-green picture. And RBI's constantly shifting position on call and put options makes us dizzy. Happy, but dizzy. The right to live in a pollution-free environment is a fundamental right of every Indian citizen, and the Constitution of India requires the government to endeavour to protect and promote the environment. And yet, recent moves by the Narendra Modi government, including amendments to the Environment Impact Assessment Notification, changes to the Foreign Conservation Act, the Land Acquisition Ordinance, the Mining Ordinance, all paint a not-so-green picture. Paiswani Upadhyay reports on the top 5 environment law changes in the last several months and their negative impacts.
Faced with a sluggish economy, the Narendra Modi-led government has in the past months made several changes to get the industrial projects moving. But many of these moves have raised alarm bells among those who care for India's environment. 298 projects were pending environment clearance, and the Environment Ministry cleared most of the backlog, passing on only a few projects for further examination. The ministry has issued over 20 notifications in the last 8 months that decentralize the clearance processes, dilute requirements, and provide exemptions from environment clearances. It took a Supreme Court order in August last year to stop the government from compromising the independence of the National Wildlife Board. And then there were the land and mining ordinances that promise growth but do not spell at what cost. The changes are many, but today we are going to take you through the top 5 environment law related developments in the last 8 months. Some that the civil society has termed damning. The first one rips the land acquisition process of its 2 most important limbs, consent and social impact assessment. The new year saw a new avatar of the Land Acquisition Act, and it came by way of an ordinance. With much hesitation, the President signed off on the ordinance and made way for a new land acquisition law. For private companies, the 2013 Act mandated prior consent of at least 80% of those affected by the acquisition. For public-private partnership projects, prior consent of at least 70% of affected families was required through a prescribed process. The ordinance does away with these requirements. It also does away with the requirement of a social impact assessment for PPP projects vital for national security or defense production, rural infrastructure including electrification, affordable housing and housing for the poor, industrial corridors and infrastructure projects.
The social impact process was so comprehensive. It called about consideration of alternatives, looking at rehabilitation, not just in terms of displacement, but to improve their quality of lives. It is a process that had just started, and at the very nascent stage, the government of the day decides that we have enough of it. So I don't think that we have even tried to know. By that time, even as lawyers, we were just trying to understand what the scope of the new Land Acquisition Act is. And before that only, the government decides to find out and come out with this ordinance saying that enough is enough, and we'll come back to a situation which is almost like the 1894 provision. So we are nowhere better. We are in fact worse than before. So to answer your question, I think we have not really tried social impact assessment. We have not done the consent clause, and before that only as a precaution the government decides to come out with this ordinance, which is really regressive.
I don't want to also say that the industry would like to acquire land by force, because tomorrow the project has to come there and everyone has to live in industrial harmony. So all that is the most important thing of any kind of industrial project, because the project doesn't come only for 1 day or 2 days. It is a project. If you look at industries like manufacturing industries which need higher tract of land, like say the chemicals or the power or the steel industry, cement industry, those projects as such, when they come up, have a huge long life. They will go up to 30 years, 40 years, even 50 and beyond. So they need to come in in a way that which creates industrial harmony and actually with inclusive growth. So this is the right thing to do. However, it is actually one of the issues which was found is that some of these projects will take a longer time to come up, and hence those projects which are in national interest should have a faster way of moving forward. So that is why these exemptions were brought in.
There is a public hearing provision which is still there in the Act that relates to rehabilitation and resettlement. So, as far as resettlement and rehabilitation is concerned, the government has kept a provision for public hearing. But I think that doesn't solve the problem. You are essentially going and telling people that we are going to take this land, whatever might be the cost, but we will talk to you as far as your rehabilitation is concerned. I think this is this is not a complete solution. Some sort of consent, some sort of agreement is essential if you want smooth and participatory governance in the country, and therefore we should have kept the consent clause. It would have forced industry to go and talk to people, which industry I know doesn't like, but something that it should learn.
The second big change gives more power to the states for forest diversion. But the question is, did the parliament envisage that? The change pertains to the Forest Conservation Act of 1980. Environment groups have questioned the legality of the circulars that have amended the Act, saying it should have been done via the Parliament. Process issues aside, the new framework exempts road construction projects around the Indo-China border from general approvals under the Forest Conservation Act, meaning forest diversion for road construction that earlier required ministry approval would now go to the states for clearances.
When 1980 the Parliament passed the Forest Conservation Act, it was very clearly acknowledged that the states cannot be trusted so far as management of forest is concerned, or so far as diversion of forest is concerned, because a state government is prone to local pulls and pressure that operate, and therefore the government of India took upon the task that if you want to divert forest land, you have to come and take prior approval from the central government. The central government can give an approval only after the Forest Advisory Committee, that is the FAC, which is our expert body, gives a specific recommendation whether the project should be accepted or rejected. That is the scheme of the 1980 Forest Conservation Act, which to a large extent has worked quite well. Now, if you look at it and compare to what the system today is, they are saying a general approval under the Forest Conservation Act to the state government. Now, firstly, it violates the provisions of the Forest Conservation Act, and secondly, it gives power to the local forest department and the local district administration and state government to allow for diversion of forest land. So therefore, if you look at it in that sense, firstly they are saying 100 kilometers from the international border, Naxalite and left extremist affected areas, what is left in the country? 100 kilometers from the border, if you take the Chinese border and all, it is the most eco-sensitive area in the country.
The third change renders the process of environment impact assessment via public consultation pointless. The Environment Impact Assessment or EIA notification of 2006 lays down the process for environment clearances for industrial and infrastructure projects. The notification lays down a 4-step process for environment clearance. First step is screening, under which an application is marked as Category A or Category B project. Second step is scoping, where terms of reference for the EIA report are prepared. Then comes the public consultation process, and finally the appraisal process is carried out. On 7th October last year, the government issued an office memorandum to say that while reviewing applications for environment clearances, the committee can ask comprehensive sets of questions and studies only at the time of issuing terms of reference. Experts say this will limit the ability of the appraisal committee to assess the impact of the projects.
The EIA system that existed in the country did require that the expert appraisal committee can direct for additional studies to be done based on the inputs that also come at that stage of public hearing. Through the new amendments that have been done, it effectively means whatever has to be given will have to be given at stage 1 itself, at the scoping stage, based on documents that is provided by the project proponent. It makes the whole public hearing a farce, principally because whatever the public say will not lead to any change in the process itself, because the public may say that the site is not important, it's a very sensitive area and should not be allotted, or it is an area for migratory species, do a 4-season analysis. All that can now not be done because of the particular direction of the ministry that everything will have to be done at the scoping stage. Then there is no need for appraisal, because the project may very well be given the final approval at the scoping stage itself.
We have been arguing very strongly that you need a mechanism to make environmental impact assessment report itself good, so that expert appraisal committee don't keep asking questions. Unless and until you make environmental impact assessment report good, and there are methods. For example, you should only get it done by accredited agencies. The report should be reviewed before it is put up to the expert appraisal committee. And there are many things that we can do to make report, reasonably good for taking decision. But this approach is a knee-jerk reaction, and I again believe the courts will come in.
The EIA notification has seen another important change, one that gives power to the states to clear more projects. But are the states equipped to do that? Earlier, projects located within 10 kilometers of an ecologically sensitive area, national park, critically polluted area or a sanctuary went to the Ministry of Environment for clearance. The government has now amended the notification to say only projects within 5 kilometers will go to the ministry and the rest will be assessed by the state authorities.
You can shift project to the state level if you have accountable, responsible and competent agencies at the state level. Unfortunately, we don't have. And therefore, all these projects are being shifted, whether because of general conditions or by shifting projects from category A to category B, is largely because they think that the projects will get cleared much quicker at the state level, and therefore there will be less hassle at the central level.
What the government has actually done is firstly increase pollution loads in already critically polluted areas, and second is to expose the protected area and national parks and sanctuaries to greater threat from industrial activities which are bound to happen in extremely close proximity.
The fifth development is the report by the high-level committee set up to review environment laws holistically. Experts say some of their suggestions are disastrous. The committee submitted its report in November last year and has suggested some drastic changes to the regulatory framework for environment clearances. A single window approval process, a fast-track treatment for linear power and coal projects, a restrictive definition of forests, and the concept of utmost good faith in industry. But two recommendations by the committee have drawn the most criticism. First, the suggestion that will require a member of the public to provide credible evidence of his bona fides for filing a complaint. The second proposed change relates to the National Green Tribunal. Under the current framework, the NGT can do a judicial and merit-based review of a case. That has led to cancellation of environment clearances to projects on the basis of non-application of mind, lack of proper impact assessment studies, and faulty public hearings. The committee has proposed that NGT's role should be restricted to only judicial review.
It actually very clearly states that anyone who wants to come to a court of law has to provide the bona fide, and there is a huge threat that if they found that the case they found has no merit, they will have to be penalized. Now, Indian Constitution says very clearly under Article 51AG that it's a fundamental duty of every citizen to protect the environment, have compassion for every single living being. High-level committee says, no, you can't have it. Think twice. It is the government's prerogative to do what it wants to do. It is the business entity's right to pollute it. And if you dare come to a court of law, be prepared to face penal consequence if you lose your matter.
Government cannot say that I will continue giving clearances on bad report and don't let anyone look at that report. I think this is unfair, and therefore government has to improve its processes at its end, whether it is environment clearance or forest clearance, and if NGT and therefore make sure that the opportunity is not there for NGT to review those projects. But you cannot say it's like that I will give wrong clearance, but I don't want anyone to review that clearance. I think this is unjustifiable.
They have suggested some constitution of NEMA and SEMA, which is going to be authorities in the state as well as the center, which will look at all the approvals and clearances and moving forward how to ensure that compliances are in place. So I think that is one of the suggestions made by the HLC, which is a good suggestion, because there will be authorities in place to ensure everything that is written by in the rule book is followed.
But if the rule book itself is changed in favor of the industry, the authorities can't do much. What we've discussed today are only a handful of changes that have been notified in the last 8 months. There have been others on irrigation projects, coal mining projects and Forest Conservation Act that have raised eyebrows. Some proposed ones, like no public consultation for linear projects like highways, pipelines, are even more worrisome. Seems like Acche din for the economy is not quite true for the environment. In Mumbai, Paiswini Upadhyay.
Well, on that dismal note, let's take a quick break on the firm. But coming up next, the RBI does a 180-degree turn on call and put options.